final frontier. These are the podcasts of the podcast Enterprise. Its only mission to explore story structures, to analyze our favorite characters and plot lines, to boldly talk about what everyone has seen before. Hello and welcome everyone to Podcast Enterprise. Here we dissect stories and episodes from Star Trek, the original series. All the season 1 episodes are done. Now we are on to season 2. And today we have the episode called Changeling. I am Bala Ramudurai, and with me I have my co-host Parvati Ramkumar. Say hello, Parvati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to season 2 of Podcast Enterprise. It's so exciting to have you here.
All right, Changeling,
Yes.
Nomad. That's what this is all about. Yes, let
Yes.
us know what's there in this episode.
When this episode begins, you find that the USS Enterprise is en route to the Malurian star system. They're responding to some sort of distress call, but when they get there, they find that there's no one to their arrival or to greet them because, according to Spock, there is no one there. Everybody has died out. And it's a peculiar situation to be in because there were some 4 billion Malurians. All of them have disappeared. And then what happens is they spot something in the far distance, the shields snap on, some sort of an energy attack comes towards the Enterprise and reduces their shielding by 20%. Spock says that the ship can survive some 3 or 4 more of those attacks, and after that the shields would come down and they'll be completely destroyed. And these attacks keep coming, their shields keep coming down, they lose their warp power. And Kirk decides to finally try and communicate with whatever is attacking them. It seems to be a small object, just about a meter tall and about 500 kilos. And while Kirk tries to talk to it, the thing responds in some sort of odd binary that they cannot decipher in the beginning. But putting this binary through the computers, they manage to convert it into English. And then they find this robotic voice talking to them, asking them whether they can leave their ship, interacting with them in a very odd way. And then Kirk decides to kind of stop these attacks from continuing because this object is apparently able to also absorb photon torpedoes. Kirk decides to take this object into the Enterprise. At first, they think it's some sort of miniature spacecraft with miniature aliens inside, but once the thing comes aboard, they find that it's a floating machine of some sort. And it identifies itself as Nomad. Kirk, when he hears his name, he puts two and two together and he remembers that there was an old Earth probe called Nomad. It was supposedly lost in space, but apparently it isn't because it's right in front of them. And then this Nomad has some very odd ideas. It wants to disinfect, it wants to cleanse biological infestations, as it calls it. It's very unreasonable, difficult to talk to, and it also wants to know the point of origin of the Enterprise, which is Earth. And Kirk does have trouble dealing with this entity, particularly since the Nomad's memory banks are damaged, and it somehow comes to the conclusion that Kirk is its creator. So here we have another problem, and it's also something of an advantage because the only reason the Nomad isn't wiping the Enterprise out is because it thinks Kirk is its creator. But then as things go by, the Nomad becomes more and more erratic. It starts killing people, it starts disintegrating people. It goes to the engine room and decides that the engines are inefficient and then tries to, reset the engine so that the ship goes much faster than it was made to go. Then Kirk makes it slow down, but ultimately what happens is it goes up to the bridge hearing Uhura sing through the intercom. It wipes Uhura's memory because through its odd logic, it doesn't like Uhura singing. It wipes out her memory. And then it also kills Scotty, who tries to stop it from attacking Uhura. This is where we see that the Nomad also has some peculiar capabilities because once it is fed the biological records of humanity and Scotty's physiology, it's able to resurrect Scotty. And then now you know that it's a dangerous thing. It is dangerously unstable. It figures out that Kirk is not actually its creator and that it's made a mistake. It goes back to the engine room, decides to switch off the life support system so that it can turn the Enterprise into a more efficient system, then go to Earth, destroy everything there, because according to its own warped programming, its duty and function is to destroy all imperfect biological infestations, and according to it, all biologic entities are imperfect. So now, towards the end, what happens is Kirk uses his logic. He manages to short circuit it. He convinces it that it has made errors of its own and therefore it is an imperfect creation on its own and it must self destruct. Eventually, what happens is Nomad activates its self destruct protocol, and then Kirk and Spock manage to put it into the teleportation room. They have it transported out into deep space where it self destructs, and then the Enterprise is safe again.
So the 4 act structure here in this episode also is followed. We start with the teaser where we get to know the enormous power of this entity. We don't know what it is yet, but there's a bolt of energy attacking the Enterprise, and with the shocking news that 4 billion people are presumed dead because of something. We don't know yet what it is. That's the teaser, and they are attacked. The entire Enterprise is rocked. In Act 1, we get to know of the extent of the power of whatever is causing it. And by the end of that act, we get to know what it is and we also see it, which is Nomad. All it is just a meter tall and seems to be floating and is talking like a computer or a robot. So people are terrified, but the only way to stop it from attacking the Enterprise is to have it on board. So that seems to be the only solution. In Act 2, we get to know of its other powers, namely killing and human beings and wiping out people's memories, that is Uhura's memory in this case. Also, somehow figures out or reasons out that Kirk is the creator and seems to listen to him. And that's the only thing that has saved the Enterprise from destruction and all its people on board from dying. But at the end of this act is when we find that, well, Uhura's memory is wiped, and because of her singing, and Scotty is killed at the end of the second act. That's where we are left at the end of the second act. That's we're wondering. We know that Scott will be resurrected somehow, but we don't know how. So that happens in the third act, which is against McCoy's wishes. He is actually resurrected Scott back, and Uhura is being re-educated. And now Kirk wants to know what is making this thing tick. The third act is dedicated to finding out what is Nomad and what is its mission. Why did its mission become this way? And at the end, it starts disobeying Kirk also because he says, I'm a biological imperfection as well. Nomad stops listening to Kirk because he is inferior and has found a new purpose, is re-evaluated its purpose, and that is to sterilize Earth, the point of origin in its own parlance. So that's the cliffhanger point that we reach in the third act, which is that Nomad, with its infinite powers, seemingly infinite powers, is going to go to Earth and sterilize people there. That is basically kill them all. Fourth act starts with red shirts being killed. Now this has become a regular feature now. Red shirts being killed. It's that the act starts with that, and Nomad going berserk, and of course it ends with our good captain talking another computer to its own death. So this is the second or third time we see this, that a computer self destroys because Kirk talked to it. And at the end, of course, Uhura is back at college level and Scotty is hale and healthy. But we'll talk about the quips and how this one ends. I really liked it. The light moment was really good. I enjoyed it. And of course, we'll come back to it when we go through it. So, Parvati, how did you like this episode, The Changeling? I think it's one of your favorites, right? I've heard
It is.
you talk about this episode quite a number of times.
Yes, it's definitely one of my favorites. I found it eerie and the suspense was palpable. I found Nomad a very interesting character, even though it's a murderous, mad, insane, crazy thing. I found it very interesting how it managed to alter its own programming after it merged with another alien probe. That is also a very interesting concept that Nomad, as they know it, is no longer there. This is some sort of a hybrid, which is why we had the show's title as the Changeling in the first place. And I found it
Mm.
utterly fascinating, to use Spock's favorite phrase. And I think that I think that this thing that calls itself Nomad hovers somewhere between being completely sentient and understanding and insane, because it knows what it's doing, and on the other hand it manages to rationalize whatever it wants to do. It rationalizes its killing by saying that all of these biological entities are infestations and all biological creatures are imperfect. And to think that such a small machine that's a little over a meter tall is able to destroy over 4 billion people of the Malurian race is also frightening. I found the entire episode very eerie and interesting at the same time.
That's an interesting observation that
Yeah.
I've heard this about even hardened criminals is that according to them, what they do is absolutely right. So,
Yeah.
what you're saying is that it's exhibiting these tendencies of wiping out people of 4 planets of a
Mm,
system. That's
true.
what is, according to McCoy, it says you've wiped out 4 planets full of people.
Yes.
And here you are, space happy, again, to use another quote from Kirk. Here he is, it is space happy and going about doing its thing and acting on its sole purpose. Okay, whatever that twisted purpose may be,
Yeah.
it is quite convinced that it is the right thing to do and it is what it is programmed to do.
Mm,
So,
true.
utter conviction that
Yes.
yes, this is what I need to be doing and this is the sole purpose why I exist.
Yeah.
It's a good observation. It's what criminals do apparently also.
I also wonder about the stability of the alien probe that Nomad merged with, because as you go on in this episode, you find that Nomad, after it was involved in a meteor collision, was
Hmm.
more or less destroyed. It wandered without purpose, to quote Spock.
Mm.
And then it
Mm.
took new directives from an alien probe that it merged with. So I started thinking that this alien probe, which was called Tanru, was probably insane on its own, or it was just too much of a thinking machine. Because when it merged with whatever was left of Nomad,
Mm.
you have this whole new entity that it finds its purpose in killing.
Mm.
And from what we know of Nomad, when it was just Nomad, it was a thinking machine, it's true, but it seemed pretty stable. It didn't want to go too out there, or it didn't have too much of creativity until it merged with this alien probe. I found that quite interesting.
The idea that it is like a muddled up sentence, right? So you
Yeah.
take one purpose, which is to learn and assist human beings in whatever way or something like that. This the is Nomad's actual purpose, but be self-defensive, be thinking on your own. And you merge it with another one which is collecting soil samples and sterilizing them so that there are no infestations. So when you
Yeah.
merge the two, you get a completely twisted purpose. But if that's what you're given because of this new programming, it is not programmed to be a compassionate being. It is programmed to execute its purpose. Both the probes were like that. That you go do your thing and then come back. It's like one of those missile stuff which goes on image recognition. So it will destroy what looks like a dangerous target. It could be a tank. It could be what looks like a tank. That's probably what went on here also, is that now it knows with its twisted purpose. It has become twisted. It is
It
not
has become
originally,
twisted.
probably that,
Yes.
yeah, it has become twisted. I was thinking of two things that possibly is a hint at. I mean, this was in the 60s, yes, but if you look at what's going on today with AI, right? So
Mm.
AI, they say, oh, it can be really helpful to you. It can help you with your chores. It can help you with
Yeah.
mundane activities that you
Hmm.
hate doing anyway. It can help you with that. Yes, absolutely agree with you. AI can be used that way. But on the other hand, if it's given the wrong purpose to do something completely weird and wild, it could also be used when you use such powerful tools and give it the wrong purpose. You're not going to be able to even stop it from doing whatever it can fire back at you.
Yeah.
That's what I took from here.
It also struck me that perhaps the Tanru was also a thinking machine, just like the old Nomad was.
Mm,
And both
mm,
of these, when they came together, they were not supposed to blend in the way that they blended. So you
mm.
created a whole new consciousness that was utterly confused, didn't know what it was doing, probably took bits and pieces from the memory banks of each of those probes and created a whole new identity for itself that was quite detrimental for the Malurian race.
That reminded me of an episode in SWAT Cats. This is a cartoon series. There are way back in the
Yes, it
early
is in the
90s it
90s.
came. So
Yeah.
this is an episode called Unlikely Alloys, I think it's called. So where there is an entity which is originally designed by its creator to fix machines whenever
Mm-hmm.
they go bad, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you give it a broken blender, it'll fix it in no time. It goes quote unquote rogue and it starts assimilating everything possible. The defenders of this mega cat city, they try to attack it. This thing with its arms now starts assimilating all these tanks and helicopters into itself. It becomes huge, and the only way for SWAT cats to defend against that is to go inside and get rid of this huge thing. By now, it has become so huge, it's assimilated more and more high-tech weapons. It's
Oh,
called Z, I think, ZED.
okay.
And finally, the guy who created it is supposed to help SWAT cats defeat it, but he goes and merges with Z, and now they take on Megacat City with its creator. So they say like, oh, the Z has found its creator and its purpose. So it's going to take over Megacat City. So
Yes.
this is totally reminded me of that. Of course, in 1994, this SWAT Cats episode came out. This is much earlier our episode, but an interesting one that machines designed for a specific purpose can over time evolve, particularly these self-thinking ones can
Yeah.
evolve into something really, and when two entities like that merge, the results can be unpredictable and in this case disastrous.
True, and it's also a fact that the Tanru is an alien creation. So you don't
Hmm.
know what sort of programming it has had or how it was created. So obviously, if it were to merge with an Earth probe, you would get something completely unpredictable. How
Hmm.
those two machines merged is a matter of mystery because you don't know exactly what sort of logic they were running, the Tanru was running on in the first place. So
Hmm.
obviously, it has to go crazy. I don't see any other way for it to behave. It couldn't have been benevolent from what we see of the past.
The episode starts off with what kind of power it has accrued, right? That
Yes,
it's able to generate about 90 photon torpedoes equivalent of power in just one shot.
yes.
And it just absorbs this photon torpedo as if nothing had happened, right?
Mm.
So you get a good sense in the teaser and in act 1 itself of what kind of energy it can harness, and the spectacular creation that it has become. It wasn't like that to begin with. They give you enough information during the episode so that you know about this. But three hits from this little thing, and the Enterprise is gone. That's what they say.
Almost, yes. It's almost
Or four, three or
completely
four.
gone. Almost completely gone. And then I was also thinking, what kind of nonsense was the Tanru created with that it could absorb so many attacks? And what
Yeah.
kind of alien technology is that? I don't think the Nomad would have had it, given that it was made so many years in the past. And it had, if it was a thinking machine, but it could only go so far. You don't know
Hmm.
what sort of advanced technology that Andrew used, and how is it able to absorb all of those energy attacks. So then probably then I was thinking that maybe when it went to destroy the Malurian race and they attacked it, it must have absorbed all of those
Ah,
attacks also and
yes,
redirected
yes.
them
That
back
was
at the
my guess also,
Malurians.
Parvati. I
Yeah,
think my guess was that probably to begin with, it was like behaving like a probe, even
yeah,
the merged one, but with
yeah,
this special purpose.
true.
However, when they tried to defend themselves, All this robot or whatever probe Nomad was doing was to use it and absorb it and use it against the people who are trying to do it, and compound it so much. Now it has become formidable when it's trying to attack the Enterprise. I think that's probably what went on. And my guess, and I don't know, I haven't read Memory Alpha so keenly on this, but
Hmm.
my guess is that this machine that Roy Kirk built was
Yeah.
good at two things. One is it needed a purpose because Roy Kirk gave it a purpose. Without that, it had to have a purpose. That was the probably the core of that machine. And the
Hmm.
second thing that it was good at was to learn and reapply. Probably because he says it's good at that, and it's compounded to this problem is that it's a machine. It does
Yeah.
that so efficiently. So it's probably doing that at a very alarmingly fast rate and learning and applying that when merged with Tanru, incredible things started happening. That it could absorb the weapons, it could absorb everything possible around it and
Yeah.
become as powerful as it got.
True. It's also a fact that it was left to its own devices once it got
Hmm.
destroyed the first time, the Nomad. And so it had to make certain decisions on its own. So, being the machine that it is, and with its damaged memory banks, and then it had this new set of instructions from whatever the Tanru is made out of, I think it was able to create some sort of an identity for itself. And then
Hmm.
because it had to take its own decision, it came up with a new purpose, something to
Hmm.
do from
Hmm.
whatever little it could read from the memory banks. I felt that that was also what made it so dangerous because it is completely autonomous. There's no way you can get through to it as such because it thinks
Hmm.
too much. It's able to take decisions, it's able to evaluate situations. Whether its evaluation is correct or not is up for debate, but still
Hmm.
it's too independent. You can't really alter its programming without talking to it.
Hmm.
It's a very unstable machine.
Actually, also summed up by Scotty. Oh, that thing can
That
do
thing.
so many things, yet it is 1 meter tall. And Spock says, intelligence does not require bulk, Mr. Scott. So
And
that's what
yeah,
this compact machine is able to do so many things, incredible things. It's
yes,
unbelievable. This is the best part about this episode. And on the one hand, you can't help but wonder. It's such an amazing, and I completely agree with Kirk when towards the end he says, "Oh, if he had been only repurposed for the right cause, what a great doctor he would have made."
so my
So that's
son the doctor.
my son, doctor.
True.
So
See,
in
eh,
Act Two
huh,
also, this is summed up by McCoy saying, "Come on, they're not just irrational things that you can carry out sterilization procedure. They are human beings, and also that's the other side. It's not
yeah.
able to be compassionate with whoever is in front of it. It can't be a real sentient being that way."
It doesn't listen basically. It has made up its mind and it's not going to listen to anybody. It's made up its mind and made up its mind that all the crew of the Enterprise, everybody is a biologic infestation, and that's it. It's not going to listen to reason because according
Hmm.
to it, it's perfect. There is a bit of ego there also because it
Hmm.
thinks it's perfect, it believes it's perfect, and that belief is so strong that it cannot tolerate any sort of imperfection. That is what Kirk uses towards the end when he tries to tell it that it has made three mistakes, one after the other. And that was enough for it to self destruct.
Mistakes are okay, they're learning opportunities, is what we tell people. Unfortunately for Nomad, it wasn't the case. If it was a mistake, it had to be eliminated, sterilized. That's the philosophy that somehow is programmed into Nomad, and it didn't work so well.
According to its own
Yeah.
logic, it is perfect. So if it is perfect, it cannot make mistakes. And if it has made mistakes, it is not perfect. And therefore, what is the purpose of it anyhow?
I like that whole sequence of Lieutenant Singh being in charge of Nomad and is wondering what to do with this. Do you need something? He's totally clueless. Here is this machine which almost destroyed the Enterprise
Yeah.
and is on board, and this guy is talking to it as if it's, oh, do you need something to drink, something to read, or how can I help you here? that
Yeah.
that scene is such a contrast to all the suspense and everything built up so far. Of course, it
Yes.
leads to that whole uhura humming and everything. That was also fun.
disdain this machine has living creatures is also very evident in that episode with Singh, because he's saying, "Do you need something?" And Nomad just ignores him completely. It's not worthy of its time. He's not worthy of its time.
Possibly it can also detect that I only talk to ranked officers. I don't talk to
That's what I
menial.
said. It has an ego problem.
Oh, big time. I think maybe whatever it absorbed from the other beings and the planet, probably that's also playing up here. The personality also got built up. I'm just making this up, but
Yeah.
maybe all the 4 billion beings that it destroyed, maybe that personalities got imprinted on Nomad as well, in some sort of way. I don't know.
The other probe does seem to be very capricious. You don't know how it's going to behave. At
Hmm.
least from what little of it you see in Nomad, you don't know how it's going to behave, how it's going to receive what you tell it, how it's going to listen to you. It might just ignore you or it might disintegrate you. You don't know. So it's that capricious nature is what makes it so dangerous. And maybe some of it came from the Tanru. Some of it
Yeah.
might have been on Nomad itself, because we don't know
Yes.
how long it was in deep space before it got quote unquote destroyed. It may
Right.
have picked up a personality of its own, merged with
Hmm.
the other one, completely and utterly unpredictable.
So unpredictable that when it hears Uhura singing, it goes to the bridge and starts finding out what's going on here. So maybe there is a little bit of curiosity there also, because it doesn't fit into its logical normal patterns, this whole thing. And it's trying to find out what's going on and probes her memory, which of course results in wiping out everything that she has learned, because it wants to know
Yeah.
what's going on.
It also seemed to believe, at least from what I could make out, that singing is possibly a waste of time. So why would you want to create all these funny noises with your throat when you could do other things with it? I don't know. It just, I didn't seem to appreciate the singing much. And
Hmm.
asking her what it is was also in a very short-tempered manner.
Hmm.
It seemed
Oh,
very annoyed, actually,
interesting.
on
What you're
hearing her
saying
sing.
is that it didn't wipe out her memory because it wanted to know what singing was, but it just wanted to get rid of her singing once and for all. And
It
this is
seemed
one
like
way to
that to
do
me. Just
it.
stop
Okay.
singing so I'll wipe your memory. So
So
you forget
shutting
how
her
to
mouth
sing.
and just like wipe her memory out.
Yeah,
That's
wipe your
easy for
memory and
me.
easier for me. I can just erase everything you've got in your head and you'll start singing.
That is mean also. He says it's a what mass of conflicting impulses.
Yes.
And Spock very kindly explains it. Oh, that's a woman for you. What the heck? Spock, I think, is in the same wavelength as Nomad, because he knows these. When McCoy is called irrational, I think I'm sure he was smirking off screen, and here is calling
Yeah.
humans a mass of conflicting impulses, and
He also said absorbing them unsettled me. He
oh
did say
yeah, yeah,
something
that's
like that. So who asked him to absorb it? It so that also got me thinking. It's if it's going to absorb personalities, that could be another reason why it's completely
yeah,
insane.
yes,
How
yes,
how
yes.
many people's personalities and thoughts did it absorb over this time?
Right, right. And that whole sequence of it trying to revive Scotty was interesting because McCoy didn't like it. And he said, but when if it is going to attempt this, it better be good, better be according to what I want. So he starts
True.
giving Nomad the entire library of the whole thing, and finally they get Scotty back.
I think perspective was first off, this creature killed Scotty,
Hmm.
and now
Hmm.
it's volunteering to revive Scotty. It's too much in a short span of time. And the fact that it was so cold in its analysis, saying that breakdown can occur at any moment after looking at Scotty's files. That's how a biological creature functions, that's how it is built. But this
Hmm.
thing, in some aspects, is very naive and very cold. I'm sure for an emotional person like Dr. McCoy, who has to deal with so much of what's going on the Enterprise, this was completely unnerving.
What did you think about Uhura's re-education and all that? So that whole
Yeah.
sequence was interesting.
It was very interesting, and I was also a little disturbed by it.
Hmm.
because while she was on the reader and she was
Hmm.
learning these English words, she was speaking Swahili. So, does
Hmm.
that mean that her mind was not fully wiped? Because I would think that she would need to be re educated in Swahili also. And there are so many things that you lose when a mind is wiped. And she seemed to have retained most of her motor impulses, which is something. At least
Hmm.
Nomad didn't attack those. But at the same time, it couldn't have mind wiped her completely and utterly if she could still speak Swahili. And she was also speaking English quite fluently. So, what exactly did Nomad do to her? I was so confused. I was utterly confused with that.
That's a talking point on Memory Alpha. I read this that it's remarkable how Uhura picks up all this. One of the points that, in fact, it was apparently a dispute between the director Mark Daniels and the actress Nichols
Mm.
in the fact that the director apparently said you should be speaking English because I don't want you to speak Swahili. You don't know Swahili, so
Mm.
speak English. The actress said, "No way," because my character was probably the first instinct language. So that language was Swahili, so she has to learn that. But it's not very clear why Swahili was even there in the first place. Even
Yeah.
if her memories are all wiped out, how come that language has stayed with her?
Yeah.
Whereas
True.
she has to learn other languages and mathematics and all that. How come if skills are not wiped out, like say Swahili speaking is a skill, that's not wiped out, then how come mathematics is also wiped out if that's a skill also that she has picked up? So
True.
lots of
And
questions there.
it's also strange that she is able to respond to Nurse Chapel and say,
Hmm.
"Thank you, Christine." How does she do that? How
Yeah,
on earth does she do that? It's just so
yeah.
odd. And I was also thinking, it went through my head that while watching this, I was thinking, see, if her memories are erased
Hmm.
completely, there are
Hmm.
so many things that you learn after you're born. There are so many things that you learn, including how to walk. It seemed
Hmm.
very odd that she was able to move her limbs with so much control after her memory was wiped. It's strange
Hmm.
that she was able to focus so well on that reader and pick up words so quickly, and within a week she's at college level. I don't understand it. I obviously Nomad did a very sloppy job erasing her memory.
I think probably Nomad only erased the English part of it and the math part of it, or because it erased the English, the associated probably function was math also. I'm not so sure what Nomad exactly did right there. So, but so in terms of memory, I read a book called Phantoms of the Brain, and Dr. V.S. Ramachandran talks about the fact that our memories are associated with emotions as well. It says that if you remember something, it's because it had some kind of emotions associated with that. That's what the theory says. And here, if I'm extending that and saying that if her knowledge is erased, her memory is erased, so should her emotions also be. But she seems
Yes.
to be perfectly happy learning it, and she's sad, angry when she can't get it. So there's something going on. So I'm not pretty clear. Maybe they needed some consulting there to get the facts straight.
I just believe that Nomad had no idea what it was doing and sort of gave her a knock on the head, and that was it.
That's another explanation Memory Alpha says is like when you wipe out files from a hard disk, the files don't get deleted. It's just that their address is sort of removed, the mapping is removed, but the
Yes.
files are still there and they just get overwritten over time. So that's what happens. So perhaps the alternate explanation given here is that address mapping is missing now, and the re-education is merely to establish these connections again. That's probably what
That could
Nomad did.
that could also be very tricky because once you erase someone's memories, or at least the core memories, you might
Hmm.
have a totally different person. Suppose Uhura
Yeah,
turned out to be a creative, artistic individual without any interest in mathematics. I mean, she did
yeah,
display an interest in mathematics,
yeah,
fortunately for the
right.
Enterprise, but still, it could have gone either way.
That was a very very dubious thing. I sort of took Scotty's revival at with a pinch of salt. It is all right because it says that I made a damage and I've fixed it back. It is only
Yes.
physical, so I could fix it back like I don't know, maybe a suture.
I could accept that a little more also because McCoy said if there's to be a chance, it has to be now. So you have to do it
Mm,
quickly before.
yes,
I think you have a window of maybe an hour or 2 hours for such a revival to take place.
right, right,
So that made a
right.
little bit more sense to me. But Uhura, I was so disturbed by it. I was upset by it. I don't
Yeah.
understand it.
But the presence of those two sequences are were one, of course, to say that this is very serious and you need to do something about it. Finding out what really went on to get this. That's when he gets the idea that perhaps it's a changeling now. It's not what it was, because till then they had the idea that it is Nomad was the only probe involved and it is
Yes.
somehow metamorphosized into this. But
Mm.
then that's when probably these two things led them to investigate further and with the Vulcan mind meld and trying to find out what really went on, and then they come up with this idea.
Yes, and that's when they find that things are a lot more complicated than they first thought, and it may not be possible to actually reason with this machine
Hmm.
because it's not interested, it's just not interested. It's figured everything out. It knows what it's
Hmm.
doing according to its own logic.
Right.
And as Spock observes, it's almost human itself. It's or
Right.
a living entity itself. It
He
is,
call it human stubbornness, almost human
yes,
stubbornness.
stubbornness. Yes. It is very stubborn because it's figured everything out. Why would you tell it anything? It doesn't need to listen to anyone.
Finally, it was Kirk who said, "Okay, now drop your screen. This guy will touch you. Don't do anything to him." So that was
Yes.
it. He's
And
not attacking you.
this is one episode Kirk making a mistake by telling it that he himself is a biological entity. He created this thing. He shouldn't have done that, is what Spock says, because you don't know how it's going to react. It's going to reevaluate everything.
Why did I
Yeah.
mean if you ignore the consequence of what happened, why did he end up doing that? I wasn't quite clear why he admitted that he was a biological unit and is inferior because
I
he
think
had killed two of the red shirts, or what was the reason
true.
for that?
I think he said that because he wanted to prove to this machine that biological, these creatures are not inferior. They created something like Nomad. So how can they be
Ah,
inferior? How can they be an infestation if through their efforts and through their intelligence they're able to create something as sophisticated as Nomad? So
hmm.
how can they be inferior? How What is Nomad talking about exactly? That was the
Okay. So
purpose of
not the
that.
imperfection part, but the inferiority part is what he was trying to get
Yes,
at,
get
and
at.
was more an impulse or an instinct rather than a thought out plan.
True, and he was so frustrated and upset that his people are dying, the life support systems are off, so many
Hmm.
things are happening. Nomad is out of control. He
Hmm.
has to somehow appeal to its logic and whatever thinking process that it has. And he thought if he says this, it might knock it out of its perch and make it realize that even though it considers itself perfect, it was
Hmm.
actually created by these humans.
That actually led to the very, very engaging and intriguing fourth act, where Kirk uses the same, what they call, if you want to remove a thorn, use a thorn, right? So use the
Yes.
same thing that Nomad has been using against them,
Mhm.
against Nomad himself, or itself in this case. So that's what
Yes.
effectively Kirk did in trying to do that. I think that's my opinion on this.
Kirk was basically trying to use logic against Nomad's logic, but what he didn't
Hmm.
quite consider was perhaps there's a lot of capriciousness also built into Nomad right now. So
Hmm.
it is not going to accept plain logic. You would have to really think out of the box, and
Hmm.
that's what he did when he managed to get it to self destruct. He was able to somehow get to that part of Nomad which is possibly a little bit insecure also. And when you convince it that it has made mistakes in a way that it cannot refute what you're saying,
Hmm.
it causes it to go into self doubt and then self destruct itself. It is a very
Yes.
dangerous gamble because again Nomad seems to display an ego. So if
Hmm.
something displays that sort of an ego and you're trying to get it to shut down, you don't know how it's going to react. But in Nomad's case, for some reason, whatever logic Kirk used worked, which is very fortunate for everybody on board the Enterprise.
Just now a thought occurred to me. Is this the Socratic argument method that you use the same argument against that person? Is that what it is?
Possibly. Yeah.
I've always wanted to learn this Socratic argument method,
Yeah.
and I've never been able to get it. But I
Mm.
think this is an example of that. If I remember those instructions, so you start with agreeing with whatever they're saying, and
Yes.
slowly build your case, and then build it exactly the opposite of where you started off. So at the
Yes.
end, that's what happens, right? It is the exact opposite of where he started. He's saying, okay, your purpose is this. You want to create, destroy anything that's imperfect. Okay, agreed. And you are not perfect. And then he goes on with that, right?
You made
And
mistakes.
you
Yeah.
make a mistake. You think I am Kirk. I'm Kirk, yes, but I'm not Roy Kirk. That's a mistake. You had the problem, the memory bank's access to that. You could have easily probed and found out. You didn't do that. That's your second mistake. Third was that in spite of these two errors, you're still going around not executing your primary function. Third
Which
mistake,
is to
done.
self-destruct. It didn't do it.
Just in case you didn't get the first two errors, there's the third error for you right there. And he's
Pretty
still
well
not
went.
sure, right? At the end, when they're going to transport him out there into deep space, he says, okay, exercise your primary function. Don't ignore that. Don't miss out on that.
I mean, there was always a danger of Nomad deciding that Kirk is all nonsense and he's going to ignore everything. So he's had to kind of appeal back to that logic and programming again and say execute your prime function and just destroy yourself.
And that led to the best scene of the whole episode. Dazzling display of logic. My congratulations, Spock says.
Yes. And Kirk tells him, you didn't think I had it in me, did you? And he said, no. I Spock was so clear about that he didn't think Kirk had it in him. Of course not.
You and logic, come on, you must be
Yeah,
kidding. The brilliance in that last scene is also the fact that they start off with the image that Kirk has just displayed incredible logic, but at the end, it's the height of illogic. He says that he could have been my son and a doctor, gets you right there, and he punches
yes.
his chest
Yeah, I
like
know.
that.
And things like it thought I was its mother, and what a doctor it would have made. My son, the doctor, it gets you right there.
Complete illogic, right? So the ending of that
Logic.
sequence is absolute illogic, the exact diametric opposite of where it starts off. That's
True.
the best part about that. I really like that. No.
Yeah, and Spock doesn't know what to make of this. Should he take Kirk seriously or is he joking or what is going on exactly?
There's one another. It was executed without dialogues. This is the McCoy versus Kirk. I noted it. Yes, this is when Scotty is brought back to life,
Hmm.
and McCoy is totally angry because it did what he couldn't do as a doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the chief medical officer on board a starship, and he's not able to revive Scotty. But whereas this bucket of bolts could do that, and all Spock does is roll his eyes and stare at McCoy. That was
That's all
enough
he does. There's no
to.
reaction. And
I'm going to do a full physical on him and all that. He just stomps out
he's
of the
really
place.
lost his temper by that. It's also so infuriating, Bala, when you think about it, that this horribly capricious, crazy machine that can destroy so quickly can also resurrect. It has god powers. It's so infuriating.
I was done without dialogue. I thought he was going to say
Yeah,
something
yeah.
clever. It was done without dialogue. That was the
I know.
best part.
I mean, Spock, in his defense, he probably expected this thing to do that also, and he felt very smug about it that that it actually did it with all its logic. So he felt very good. And what he would do then is he would stare at McCoy and give him that sort of try to put him in his place with that stare.
This is one of those classic Spock McCoy moments.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. We get our likes and dislikes section.
I like this episode in its entirety. I'm not sure that I would want them to reconsider anything at this point because I really liked it. Liked that scene where Uhura sings, and I liked where this machine is so confused that it's thinking Kirk is its creator just because there's a Kirk in the name of its creator, Jackson
Mm,
Roy Kirk. It's so confused that it's not able to tell one person from the other. And I also
mm,
like the fact that in spite of all this, it's still a machine and its logic is fallible. And there are ways to short circuit its thinking. I really liked all of those aspects of this episode. What I didn't like is the same thing we discussed before also. What kind of memory wipe did it do on Uhura? Either it doesn't
Hmm.
understand the brain well enough and did some sort of cursory mind wipe, or it was an oversight. I'm not sure what it was, and it wasn't very clear. And Uhura, who has had her entire education erased from her head, can get to college level in a week. She must be some sort of incredible genius. Yeah, that was the one thing I found very unconvincing.
I like the fact that this one was kept me on tenterhooks all through the episode, because you can clearly see the stakes are very high even to begin with, because you
Mm,
saw that 4 billion people died because of this thing, and that they're trying to find out what makes it work. How do I get to this? The entire planet Earth and people on it are at peril. The upping of stakes throughout the episode, one by one by one, and even though they had a stroke of luck, the Kirk name matched, and it was sheer luck, but that
mm,
ran out very quickly,
yeah.
and that part was really amazing. The fact that it is so well paced, we just could not stop or pause or go forward or something like that. It was like that, it kept you going all through that. So
True.
I really like that. That's what I learned from this episode. Of course, the deeper question, I already talked about it early on,
Mm,
was, and particularly that's something that we are grappling with these days, is the
mm,
idea of self-learning and self-correcting AI. But what is the purpose of this AI, artificial intelligence? So where can that lead us to? Of course, this seemed like it was hinting at a possibility that it could be destructive,
mm-hmm.
but that is a real possibility, is what this episode sort of pointed
Yes.
at us. So that was the deeper question for me to think about, saying, hey, with such a powerful entity, because I've heard the CEO of OpenAI, ChatGPT
Mm-hmm.
products, original
Mm-hmm.
companies, Sam
Yeah.
Altman, talk about, hey guys, don't talk about it as if it's some doomsday machine. It's just a tool, and I use it like a tool. Agreed, it is a tool. However, the difference is it's learning my ways, it's learning what I can do. I have read reports where it's doing better than what humans are doing in
Yes.
many aspects. So it was not like that before, but it has learned enough that it has actually passed that threshold. It's
Yeah.
doing better than us. Without the right purpose, or with a skewed sense of purpose,
Mm.
what would happen with these is a bigger question that this episode deals us.
And the dangers of not having any empathy or value for life is
Hmm.
also a problem. If it sees
Yes.
something that it deems is problematic, the
Hmm.
solution should not be just to eliminate the problem, as these machines think. There should be
Hmm.
some other way out of it. But no, in Nomad's case, particularly, it was so driven by the need to stabilize worlds and civilization and the galaxy itself that it removes all obstacles in its path. That is quite
Hmm.
brutal. But it
Yeah.
doesn't realize that because it doesn't know enough to care that way. It has no emotions that way.
Hypothetical question: if the screenwriter were to appear in this episode, what would you
Hmm.
ask them to change or to explain about this
There
episode?
were a couple of things that I found a little odd, honestly. One was Uhura's learning, which we already
Hmm.
talked about. Maybe they could
Hmm.
have expanded or changed that a little bit and said that her entire memory wasn't wiped or something like that.
Mhm.
The other thing was, I found it a little bit unconvincing when I saw the ending and how much time it took Nomad to self destruct. It went into some sort of thinking and confusing itself. It took too long to self destruct, in my opinion. And Kirk also waited in the transportation room while it was talking in that high pitched voice. I thought that was a little bit unconvincing. Being a computer of such sophistication, I would have thought it would have run through its processes fairly quickly and self-destructed right there in the engine room. So
Ah,
that was that I
like
found
like
that a
the
little.
like a smoke going up or something like
Yes,
that. So it could
something
have
like
been
that.
that way.
In a flash, because it doesn't
Mm.
take much time for it to think. So it
Mm.
would have just self-destructed right there. That was the only
Mm.
thing I found a little unconvincing. What about you?
I guess they needed the spectacular finish at the end with
They
that
did.
light thing and all that. So
That's right.
because of all the power. Speaking of power, that's what I wanted to know is how did it accrue so much power as in
Mm,
energy wise? It doesn't
yeah.
really. It says I'm perpetual, and it can generate a bolt of 90 photon torpedoes in a moment,
While
and
firing.
it did
Yes.
that like thrice. How does that really function? I could have a little bit into that technology would have really helped me.
So,
Even Scotty passing a remark like that, oh, it does this, matter antimatter, it did it this way,
yeah.
and so something like that would have. It doesn't need a lot of elaboration. It needed just a remark would have helped.
I think we've already got something of an elaboration when they say that it merged with an alien probe of unknown
Ah,
origin. So when you say
okay.
that, you don't know what technology went into that alien probe. Maybe it
Ah,
could do all of these things.
okay, okay. That makes sense. Okay, so you answered it for the screenwriter. Fine. I needed answer. I got it. All right. So thank you so much, Parvati, for discussing the Changeling. It was
Thank you.
one of the best episodes, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you and bye.
Bye, everyone.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening to the podcast Enterprise. Please do share your reviews with us and please share this podcast with any of your writing friends or trickies. Live long and prosper.